far as companies go, it was a behemoth. In 1970, in the primary market in which it operated, it had 90% of the market share. In the secondary market that it operated in, it had 85%. And everyone thought that this company was just going to be one of those greats that just went on forever. And yet today, its name, for a lot of people, aren't even known. I was doing my research for this lesson, and I had something pulled up on the computer about it. And just to give you an example, my son walked in calling and said, "Dad, who's?" And he called off the name. He'd never even heard of him before. In 2012, they went bankrupt. And it's a pretty interesting study as to why they went bankrupt. But most of us here, if you drove here today at least, you probably remember Kodak. I mean, they were such a big player in the market that when you captured those special moments in life, what'd you call them? A Kodak moment. I mean, they were just massive. But in 2012, when they declared bankruptcy, they were put out of business, some people say because of the digital camera. In the 1990s and the 2000s, digital photography took off, and you didn't have to send that little roll of film off and wait a week or so for it to come back, and then you had the little print that had all your pictures in about a quarter by quarter square, and you're trying to look at them. Now you can just take the picture and pull it up, hook it to your computer, and go ahead and just get it right there. And you say, well, Doug, people miss trends all the time in business, right? Businesses go out of operation because they just can't see the future. But that's not exactly the case with Kodak. They were taken out of business by the digital camera, but guess what? In 1975, one of their employees invented the first digital camera. He's got it on his shoulder right there. It looks like one of those old beat boxes, one of those radios that you used to pack around. So it wasn't like they couldn't see the trend coming. They invested some in this technology, but for most of the time they didn't care. They didn't care because film was such a profitable industry. They focused more on the wrong thing. Because at the time, when the film industry was still booming, it had a markup of like 70%. And they really liked that. And they wound up caring more about the profits that film was making than where the future happened to be going. And because of it, it took them under. You see, it's easy for a large corporation to care about the wrong things because a large corporation is filled with people. And a great number of times, people, care about the wrong things. And this morning, I don't know any better way to illustrate this fact than the book of Jonah. Now, Jonah is a nursery room favorite, right? Every time we think about Jonah, all we can think about is the big, huge whale. And yes, that's a pretty cool part of the story, I got to admit, God, I'm just not going to do what you want me to do. I'm going to run away. Okay? God in that instance, what I'd like to call arranged transport, right, for Jonah, to get him to go to where he wanted him to go. But the real story, to me, in the book of Jonah is not in chapters 1, 2, or 3. It's in chapter 4. And in chapter 4, I want us to zoom in there this morning, and I want us to look at what God cares about. And I want us to look at what Jonah cared about. Because you're going to see that those two things are drastically different. And I hope the things that we see this morning keep us from getting eaten by a whale. I mean, help us to be better Christians. You know what I'm trying to say. Now, as we get started here, I need to I need to tell you where the idea for this lesson come from. I need to give you some structure before we get all the way down to the end of this. You say, what's he been talking about for 20, 30 minutes? If you look at the end of Jonah chapter 4, there's a verse in verse 11, and there's a word in that verse that, depending on the English translation you have in your hand, is translated one of several different ways. The ESV says, this is God speaking to Jonah. And should I not pity Nineveh? That word pity there in the ESV. In the NIV, should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh? The Christian Standard Bible says it this way. So may I not care about. You see, this word here in the original Hebrew is a word that it talks about an emotion, but it also talks about an action that's caused by that emotion. You think about pity or concern or care. I think care is the best English word that we have today for that, right? If you look at something and you care about it, you're going to move. You're going to take action. And Jonah cared about some things. Jonah was very passionate about what he cared about. But God cared about some things too. And there's a great disparity there between what Jonah cared about and what God cared about. And maybe this is going to be a shocker for you, but I still think today, for a lot of human beings, there's a great disparity between what God cares about and what we care about. So, with that being said, we're going to set the stage for chapter 4. I think we need to look at chapter 3 to do that. So, this is after Jonah's been swallowed up. Chapter 3, he gets spit back out on dry land. I have no idea what he smells like. It had to be horrible. But look at what happens in chapter 3. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. So Jonah rose and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days in journey in its breadth. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey, and he called out, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least of them. The word reached the king of Nineveh, and he rose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he issued a proclamation and published throughout Nineveh, by decree of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water. But let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hand. Who knows? God may turn and relent and turn from his fierce anger, so that we may not perish. When God saw that they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said what he would do to them, and he did not do it. Can you imagine? You imagine sit out and walk across Elkton or Trenton or Guthrie and preach, yea, 40 days and this town will be destroyed and everyone in it comes to God. Can you imagine what that had to be like? I mean, if that happened, we would talk about it for hundreds of years to come. And yet, for Jonah, it happened. But that's, as Paul Harvey would say, there's the rest of the story, isn't there? Jonah's not going to be exactly happy about this. And there's several reasons why. But like I say, I want us to get in now to chapter 4. And we're going to look at what Jonah cared about versus what God cared about. And in particular, we're going to start out with this idea of talking about things that God does not care about. Look at verse 1. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. Can you imagine going and preaching to a town and converting the whole entire town, mayor down to the dog catcher and everyone in between, and being upset about it? I mean, have you ever stopped and wondered how God even puts up with us? How patient he must be towards us? Jonah, I want you to go. I ain't going. Just throw me out in the ocean. I'd rather drown as I had go. Okay. You know, he eats him up with the whale, spits him out. Jonah, go. Verse 3, I find it interesting. Verse 1, he had to tell him again, go to Nineveh. Okay, I'll go. And when he goes and does what God tells him to do, now he is angry about it. Can you imagine sitting on the throne and just, I just wonder how many times, and I'm sure God's better than this, but if I was God, I could imagine just sitting on the throne going, again, one more time. But I'm sure he's better than that. You see, the first thing that we see here with Jonah is that God did not care about his preferences. God didn't care about what he wanted. And I think today, for far too many times, God doesn't care about our preferences either. Now, hang on just a minute. You're probably sitting here thinking, well, Doug, you're saying that God doesn't care about me. That's not what I said. There's nothing about Scripture that would make you think that God does not care about you. Why did his son have to go and die on the cross if God did not care about you? What did I say? God didn't care about his preferences. Jonah, I'm sure, would have preferred not to go to Nineveh. Jonah, I'm sure, would have preferred to have Nineveh destroyed. The reason for that is because a great number of times Nineveh has come in and attacked Israel, and they're basically their staunch enemies. Time and time again, they have attacked them and they've punished them, and they have basically made their life miserable. Right? We're talking about Jonah's enemy. He would prefer that God did not save them. But God didn't care what his preference was. Could you imagine if God kowtowed to everybody and what they wanted? You know, a lot of times what I want may not be the best for everybody else. I mean, have you ever stopped and considered that? What I want may not be what's best. I mean, let's just be honest. Sometimes what I want isn't what's best for me. You ever noticed every dollar store you've ever been into? I promise you, when you go in the dollar store, one of the first 2 or 3 aisles you're going to hit is what? The candy aisle. And it's not just a little bit of candy. No, it's the whole entire aisle, double-sided, and they put that thing right up front. Why? Because we know we don't need sugar, but I'm sure I would prefer some. You see, our preferences a lot of times don't matter. Now, is it possible maybe for our preferences as we live a godly life and our preferences to line up with God? Sure. I'm not saying he doesn't ever care about our preferences. But how many times do our preferences not line up with his will? How many times do our preferences not line up with what he cares about? A lot. If we're looking at me and my life, and I don't know, maybe you're better at this than I am, but I dare say for all of us, there's lots of times that he's not going to care about my preferences because my preferences aren't right. Right? So, we go on to verse 2. He's angry about this. Verse 2 and 3. And he prayed to the Lord and said, "O Lord, is this not what I said when I was yet in my country? That's why I made haste to flee to Tarsus, for I knew that you're a gracious God and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." Once again, I just imagine God sitting on the throne. He asked to die. Just strike him with a lightning bolt, right? I mean, he asked for it. But he didn't do that. You see, God didn't care about his plans. God, you told me to go to Nineveh to preach to those people, to try to save them. And you know what? I had a different plan. I'm going to get on a boat and I'm going to go the different direction. I don't care. Just throw me in the ocean in the middle of the storm. I'll probably drown, and I'd rather do that as I go to Nineveh and preach to them people. And God says, verse 3, he says, "It's better for me to die than to live." Really? How do you know that? How do you know that? You see, at the very best, we're horrible plan makers. You know why we're horrible plan makers? Because we can't see the big picture. We can't see what's coming tomorrow or the next day or the next day or the next day. We might be really good at making the plans with the information that we have, but we don't have all the information always. Rarely, I would say, do we have all the information. God is a better plan maker than we are. Now, am I saying, Doug, I should never make any plans, just throw my hands up and Jesus take it? No. But you can make plans that leave room for God's plans. James chapter 4. You say that we'll go into such and such city and buy and sell and trade for a year and get gain. And he says, you ought to say, if the Lord, what? If the Lord wills, we'll do those things. I've got a plan, but you know what? I'm going to leave room for God's plan. God may have a different plan than I do. God may want to tweak my plan a little bit. God may want me to go the completely opposite direction. Of course I'm going to make plans for my life. Of course I'm going to do those things. I'm going to get up and go to work, and I'm going to have a career and a family and have hobbies and interests. Of course I am. But when I stop making room for God's plan, that's a problem. That's a problem. Because if I don't care about what God's plan is for my life, then there's no way I'm going to follow him. I just can't. I can't do what he wants me to do and not care about it at the same time. It just doesn't work. And there's a lot of times that God doesn't care about our plans because we're selfishly trying to make them for what we want and where we want to go and what I need. You ever prayed to God and said, God, I need this, I need that, and I need this to work out that way? How did that work out for you? God's a better plan maker than we are. We'll go a little bit further. Jonah 4 and verse 4. And the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? Now, I doubt this will ever happen to you, but if God comes to you one day and says, you think it's the best idea that you're angry right now? The automatic answer to that is probably no. Okay? If God has to ask you, is it a good idea for you to be angry? Do you do well to be angry? Then you pretty much well just guess the answer to that question is no, it's not well for me to be angry, right? And it's not just once. God has to ask him this question twice. You look at verse 9, but God said to Jonah, do you do well to be angry for the plant? And look at this answer. Whew. And he said, yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. Rrr. Right. You don't think you ain't listening, you're wrong. God, I'm angry. Think God cares about your anger? What's the Bible say? Be angry and what? Sin not. Is there times we're going to be angry? Sure. Sure there is. But if we let that override us and overrule us, if we let that get in the way of our relationship with God, if we let that get in the way of his plans, if we let that get in the way, then that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. Verses 5 and 6. Jonah went out of the city and sat on the east of the city and made a booth for himself, and he sat down in it, under it in the shade till he could see what would become of the city. Now the Lord appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. Now, there's something right here that I never really caught till I studied for this lesson. In verse 5 it says, he's sitting outside the city. You done went across it for 3 days preaching. The whole place is repented. But you're going to go outside the city to see what will become of it. What did he just say in verses 1 and 2? What did he just admit? I kind of skipped over this part. Right? For I know that you are a gracious God and merciful and slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. He just admitted that he knew that God is going to forgive him. This whole place is repenting now. God, you're going to forgive them. But yet he's still sitting outside the city in a little hut, waiting on to see if God will destroy the place. Can you imagine? You just went across the city and preached, and the whole place repented, and you're mad at God. You slur God because of how good he is. God, I knew you were going to forgive these people. I'm going to sit out here, and I'm going to wait a little while, and I'm going to see if you'll destroy them anyway. Can you imagine? That's what he's doing. And God is going to show him a lesson with this plant. Everybody thinks the whale is the most powerful part of this story. I think the plant and the worm show us way more and are way more powerful to us than the whale is. The whale's cool. I mean, getting swallowed up and riding around for 3 days in the belly of this great fish, okay, that's neat. Okay, that's I'll give you that. But apparently the whale was not enough to change his heart. Apparently the whale was not enough to change his mind. And God is going to give him this plant. And I want you to notice the last part of verse 6. Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. Why was he exceedingly glad? Because of the plant? Because it gave him shade. It benefited him. You think that Jonah loved that plant for a selfish reason? You think Jonah hated them people for a selfish reason? You think God doesn't care about our selfish ambitions? I don't think he does. And it's really easy. It's really easy. I want you to notice here, I put in all these in the bottom, I put our, because I'm preaching to me as much as I am all of us, right? It's really easy for me to have selfish ambition as well. Well, it's about me and my career, and it's about this and that, and you know, it's really easy for the focus to be on me. Don't think I'm not preaching to me at the same time. But God doesn't care about our selfish ambition. It doesn't matter if we got $100 million or 10, he owns it all. I like to say very lovingly that he has all the ribeyes on 1,000 hills. That's my favorite part, okay? He owns it all. Doesn't matter what I have. Whatever I have is because he's given it to me. What is my focus? What do I care about more than anything else? Do I care about the stuff? Do I care about this plant? Do I care about, there's no telling. You imagine how big a city's got to be for it to take you 3 days to walk across it. That's a huge city. And Jonah didn't care nothing about them. But he loved his plant because he was getting something out of it. God didn't care about his selfish ambition. He didn't care about ours either. Now, you look at all this, and we've talked about everything that God doesn't care about. Let's talk about what he does care about. Verse 7. When the dawn came the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, and it withered. As the sun was rising, God appointed a scorching east wind. The sun beat down on Jonah's head so much that he almost fainted, and he wanted to die. And he said, it's better for me to die than to live. Then God asked Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? Yes, it's right, he replied. I'm angry enough to die. Really? And the Lord said, you cared about the plant, which you did not labor over and did not grow. It appeared in the night and perished in the night. So may I not care about that great city of Nineveh, which has more than 100,000 or 120,000 people who cannot distinguish between their right and their left, as well as many animals. A person that is so young that he cannot distinguish between their right and their left is what we call what? A child. If there's that many children in that place, how many more people are there in a city big enough that it takes you 3 days to walk across? God didn't care about his anger. God didn't care about his selfish ambition. God didn't care about any of that. What God cared about and still cares about is souls. That's what God cares about. The exact people that Jonah hated was the ones that God cared about. And that's a lesson to me. Because it's really easy. It's really easy for me to look at somebody that's different. Or maybe they've got a little bit of history with me. Maybe they've done something over and again. Right? Peter asked, how many times my brother sinned against me and I forgive him? 7 times? Because that 8th time I'm going to drop a hammer on him and knock him plumb out. No, Peter, you're not going to do that. Because I'm God and I care about souls. We look at this today and I don't have a big grand conclusion. I don't know what else to ask you except what do you care about? I know God cares about you. I know he cared enough about you to send his son to die on the cross. I know that he cares enough about you to bless you, to want to put people in your life that can help you. And I don't know what your need is this morning. Maybe you need to come front. Maybe you need to go out back. Maybe you need to pull somebody aside. I don't know what you need. But if you need help today, don't leave here without it. Reach out if you need help today. Rocky, come sing to us.